Ladies and gentlemen, welcome at Life Changing Ideas, virtual talk with Rebecca Newton on how to develop authentic gravitas. This event is co-organized with the CFO committee of ICPAC, the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Cyprus. My name is Maria Markiris, and I am the head and co-founder of Life Changing Ideas. Life Changing Ideas is an inspirational speaker series organized by the University of Nicosia and Global Training. We host some of the world's greatest minds live on stage and virtually. We talk about business, we talk about inspiration, we talk about transformation. Thank you for joining in at today's event, which will give you valuable insights on how to develop your own gravitas. And gravitas is certainly something that we all need more of. On camera, we have Kyriakos Iordanous, the General Manager of ICPAC, our speaker, Rebecca Newton, and Stefanos Papadopoulos, part of the CFO committee of ICPAC. I welcome everybody. Rebecca is an organizational psychologist and senior visiting fellow at the London School of Economics and Political Science in the Department of Management, and is faculty on various leadership programs at Harvard Law School. She is the founder and CEO of leadership development consultancy, Coach Advisor. Rebecca has over 20 years of experience in coaching and advising organizations globally on leadership, change, and culture. She's a regular contributor to the Harvard Business Review and is the author of Authentic Gravitas, Who Stands Out and Why. We have 10 copies of Rebecca's book to give away to 10 lucky participants. So stay with us until the end of the session and claim your copy. Before we dig into Gravitas, let me thank our sponsors. Many thanks to our today's sponsor and co-organizer, the CFO committee of ICPAC. And many thanks to our long-term sponsors who have been supporting us throughout this very difficult and very disruptive year. The prime sponsor is Hellenic Bank. The champion sponsors are CETA and Above Cyprus. Our media sponsor is Digital Tree. Additionally, we are supported by the Research and Innovation Foundation of Cyprus. I now turn to Kyriakos for his welcome message.
Thank you, Maria. It is indeed my great pleasure to welcome everybody at this very interesting event being held virtually, of course, given circumstances, despite the sunny weather outside. ICPAC and our CFO committee, operating within the CSR framework of our institute, gladly support and sponsor this very interesting event, which we are confident that by its conclusion, it will give additional value to everybody's time. ICPAC celebrates this year its 60th anniversary, and this event actually inaugurates our festive activities. We have 60 years of contribution to the society, the economy, and of course to our members. Allow me also to express my sincere thanks to Life Changing Ideas for organizing these events, the University of Nicosia, and Global Training as well. My particular gratitude, though, goes to Dr. Rebecca Newton for being here with us digitally to present and discuss the very useful topic of how to develop authentic gravitas. Concluding, I would also like to thank our CFO committee for their initiative today. The main purpose of our committee is to provide a channel of by-way communication between the institute and the industry, the CFO community, and the rest of the finance people as well. ICPAC provides an umbrella to all CFOs via training, transfer of knowledge, and active influence and real work with various stakeholders, government departments, and other functions for their daily business activities. Our CFO committee is the voice and medium for this by-way communication between the country's professional institution and the accounting professionals. Once again, thank you for being here with us. And we do look forward to a very interesting and promising afternoon. Maria, back to you.
Thank you, Kyriakos. Rebecca, we'll let you talk for about 20 minutes and take us through the journey of Gravitas. Then I'll be having a short conversation with you. And then Stefanos will take over to go through the Q&A that people should be sending us at the Q&A box all the time. We'll be more than happy to answer most questions at the end of the session. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Maria. And thank you, Kyriakos and Stefanos, for welcoming me here today, and for everyone who is part of the Life-Changing Ideas team. It's my real pleasure to be with you here. I'm here in London right now. I think I would rather be visiting Cyprus, but here we are anyway. So I am looking forward to spending this time with you. So I guess I wanted to just share with you how this came about, first of all. So as Maria mentioned, I have a book called Authentic Gravitas, Who Stands Out and Why. And for the many people who are joining us here today, thank you for taking the time to join us. And I thought I'd start off by telling you a bit about why this came about. So as Maria mentioned, I spent time as an academic at the London School of Economics and various other business schools that I work with. And at the same time have been a coach and consultant and advisor for about 20 years to leaders and professionals in all different industries globally, which is a real privilege. And in coaching sessions in particular, I found that people would say to me time and time again, Rebecca, do you know what I really need? I need more gravitas. And they would almost whisper it, like something that maybe they shouldn't want, or something that they feel that they couldn't really have. Rebecca, I need more gravitas. Or sometimes their manager or their leader would say, when giving kind of feedback and input into coaching, so before we start the coaching, we'd get some different perspectives from people, and they would say, what this person needs is more gravitas, but not really go into much more detail about what that would look like and how they would go about that. So I set off on a research journey to find out, what do we mean when we talk about gravitas in the workplace today? You know, if you look at the Cambridge English Dictionary, you'll see that gravitas is about being trusted and respected, but also about seriousness in manner. And so I really wanted to find out, how is it that we're using this term gravitas in the workplace today? It gets thrown around a lot, but what do we actually mean when we say, I need more gravitas? And so the way that we use the term in the workplace today is really, it is about being trusted and respected. So we found that people who are regarded to have a high degree of gravitas, and I say that high degree because it's not you have gravitas or you don't, but to have a high degree of gravitas, were trusted and respected by others. Their ideas were taken seriously. Their words carry weight. And ultimately, they have a positive impact on the people and the situation around them. So that's what we're talking about today when we talk about how to develop gravitas. We're talking about being trusted and respected, having your words carry weight, your ideas are taken seriously, and you're having that positive impact on people and situations around you. Now, this is different from what I call surface gravitas. And that's important to differentiate. Surface gravitas is this kind of, it's posturing. You know, it's who's the biggest, loudest person in the room. That posturing of dominance, that's surface gravitas. So you don't need to be like that in order to be regarded as having a high degree of gravitas by others. And actually, that can have an adverse effect as well. It can have a negative impact on the people around you. So if you think about people who you've crossed paths with in the past, who you might think have that surface gravitas, sometimes it can actually be adverse gravitas. It can have a negative impact because all that posturing and that dominance actually shuts down the conversation. It stops other people from contributing. It reduces the quality of ideas that come out. And as a result of that, we have, you know, we don't have outcomes that are as positive. So authentic gravitas is quite different to that posturing, dominant surface gravitas. So there are 3 myths that we found about gravitas in the research. The first is what I call the myth of the gravitas gift. So the myth of the gravitas gift is the belief that it's something that you have or you don't. And ultimately, people would say to me, I'm just not like that. Thinking, I can't be like that. I can't be someone who has this impact on others. So that's the first mistake that we can make, the first myth that we need to debunk, because actually, as I've seen in 20 years of coaching leaders across all kinds of different companies, gravitas is absolutely something that you can develop. The second myth that we need to debunk is the myth of charisma. So people often think that you need to be really charismatic in order to have gravitas. And that's not true. There are people who are charismatic, who have gravitas, but also there are people who have gravitas and have a high degree of gravitas, but they wouldn't necessarily be characterized as being charismatic. What does matter is being able to connect with people. So I would worry, if you're looking to develop your gravitas, I would focus much more on your ability to connect with people than I would worry about the extent to which you feel you have charisma. And then the third myth, and I think this is probably the most important, is the myth of confidence. So when we look at other people who we consider to have a high degree of gravitas, we look at them and we think, what is it about them? You know, in a room full of peers, maybe when that person starts talking, everybody stops and really listens. And you know, we can think, what is it about that person? Why do they have gravitas? What is it about them? And then when we try and break that down, we can look at other people and think, they've got so much confidence. They're really confident. So when we're asking people in the research to describe others with gravitas, they would often say they're confident. Then what we did was we went and asked those people who others considered to have a high degree of gravitas about themselves. And do you think that they said that they were consistently confident? Absolutely not. In fact, many of them described how they felt, you know, some of them described feeling imposter syndrome at times. Many of them described how they felt that they needed to give themselves a pep talk. So like to rally in the morning, you know, one woman described to me how she said in the mornings, I'd look at myself in the mirror and I'd say, you've got this, you can do it. What they're doing is choosing courage. They're choosing to be courageous. They're not waiting to have confidence. So while we look at other people and we see what we think we see is confidence, what we're actually seeing is people choosing to have courage. So if you're looking to develop your own gravitas, be more concerned with the decision to be courageous, a kind of do it afraid message, rather than worrying about not having enough confidence, because not having enough confidence can be a negative cycle. We can think, oh, I'm just not confident enough. And then we feel badly about ourselves, and that actually has a negative effect. So worry about confidence, worry about courage rather, over confidence. So there's been really interesting research in this space. You know, one of the things that some research has suggested is that courage and integrity are actually two of the strongest predictors, they call them virtuous predictors, of leadership performance. Courage and integrity might just be two of the most important factors when it comes to leadership performance. Being able to influence and to have a positive impact on a wide group of people. And interestingly, there's other research that suggests that integrity fuels courage. So if you're committed to having integrity, you know, behavioral integrity is that commitment to doing what you say you'll do, and integrity in general to outworking your, you know, the things that matter. That can fuel your courage. So if you think about an important meeting that you may have been in and you hear something that really doesn't sit well with you, it's that sense of integrity of this really matters to me, I'm going to speak up about it, that gives you the courage, right? So integrity fuels courage. And those are the two things that really may just be important determinants of leadership effectiveness, not confidence. So when I said to you that people would say, Rebecca, do you know what I really need? I need more gravitas. And that's what they'd say, I need more gravitas. And that would be quickly followed by another sentence, which is, but I still want to be myself. So I need more gravitas, but I don't want to pretend to be someone else. Hence why I talk about authentic gravitas. Can you have gravitas and still be you? The answer is yes. It is not about faking it. So I don't want to pretend to be someone else. Now, this instinct actually is really positive. It's a really powerful driver right now. So I think that people are not looking for perfection. They're really craving authenticity. And authenticity is remarkable, actually. It fuels trust and it fuels respect, which are two of the key components of gravitas. But also authenticity is actually one of the strongest predictors of well-being. So our own personal well-being is impacted by the extent to which we can be authentic. And in these current times, I think we all need that. So what does it mean to be authentic? Because sometimes we, the word being authentic is thrown around a lot right now. One thing that's important is to understand the difference between what it is to be natural, our kind of natural style, and being authentic. So authenticity can be thought of as authenticity is about, having a good sense of your own self. So what is it that I really think? What is it that I feel? And that's important, reflecting on how we feel. I had one managing partner once say to me, "Ooh, Rebecca, I've never used the word feeling at work before." But feelings guide our decision-making. Feelings are good data. So, we can come back to that in the Q&A, but it's about being mindful of what do I think about this situation? What do I think about what's going on and what's important? What do I feel? What are my strengths? So what are the strengths that I have and what are the things that energize me, knowing that? And what do I value? What's most important to me? That's what it means to be authentic, is to know those things and to behave in alignment with that, to try and outwork our values. So there's a difference between what it is to be natural and what it is to be authentic. So being natural, on the other hand, can be showing up just, based on our personality or how we're feeling that day. So let's say you're really angry. Being authentic is not going into the office or onto a call with your team and just showing your anger to them. It's not about taking all emotions and being fully transparent. It's about being wise, but making sure that we're aligning our intended impact with our actual impact. So feedback is really important. One of the ways, I had some, just share this, but I had some feedback years ago. I did, we run lots of 360s and profiles to help people understand their strengths and their energizers and things like that. And I had some feedback once, and the coach said to me, Rebecca, the results of your 360 and your profile suggest that you're stubborn. And I said, no, I'm not. And I really meant it. But it turns out, sure enough, I have stubbornness comes quite naturally to me, but that's not in line with my values. I really believe in getting diverse perspectives, that things are better when different people can contribute. I value collaboration. So me being authentic is me trying to make sure that I am outworking that value of collaboration and of allowing other people to contribute in a meaningful way, not outworking what might come more naturally to me based on whether that's from personality or from things that we've seen modeled, not just bringing that to the table. Goffey and Jones from the London Business School talk about authenticity as being yourself with more skill, which I quite like. So authenticity is powerful, fuels trust and respect, is a driver of well-being, but it's essentially about outworking your values, knowing yourself, what you think and feel, and your strengths and energizers, and what's important to you. So one way of doing that, a really practical way of doing that, and to work out what those things are that matter to you. It's quite difficult to think, how would I describe myself? You can just try that, list your values and the things that matter to you. The other thing that can be useful to do is ask yourself, how would you want somebody else to describe you? So let's say if you were, let's say somebody who hadn't worked with you before asked somebody else who had worked with you, how would they describe you? What would you want that person to say? So I encourage you to take a moment and to just write down, if someone else were to describe you as a leader, as a colleague, as a consultant, in whatever capacity, if someone else were to describe you, what would you want them to say? Just write some words down. It's a really good indication of the things that matter to us. Okay, so that can help with choosing to live and work with authenticity. And then finally, the last point that I want to leave you with is just some of the research that's really powerful, showing the difference that authentic leadership can make. So we're just going to share a slide here, and this is just sharing with you some of the positive relationships between, so authentic leadership. So if we think of leadership about, influencing and facilitating others to achieve collective goals. So it's not necessarily, this is not title or hierarchy. This is about influence, and you can do that from anywhere in the hierarchy. And, creating a sense of why, the purpose and meaning, how we're doing things, and ultimately influencing and facilitating other people to achieve those collective goals. So authentic leadership, if you can do that with authenticity, lead with authenticity. Lots of different research has shown that there's a positive relationship between authentic leadership and these factors that you can see here on the screen. So psychological well-being, job performance, job satisfaction, engagement, the extent to which people around you are engaged with their work, happiness, the extent to which people around you as a leader, those people identify with you and with the work, and the extent to which they feel empowered, the trust in leadership, organizational citizenship behaviors, that going the extra mile, how committed people are to the organization, whether we have an openness in our organizational climate. So that openness is really important for creating psychological safety, people feeling that they can open up, share ideas, that they're valued. It's a big driver of, positive diversity and inclusion. And ultimately, some studies have suggested a positive relationship between authentic leadership and the firm's financial performance. So authentic leadership is really powerful. So I encourage you to think about, to ask yourself those questions for how can you be authentic? And it's not something that you do or don't do. It's not today now I'm going to be authentic as a leader. It's something that is a daily practice that we choose to do as we are attempting to have gravitas, to have that positive impact on the people around us, to be people who can be trusted and respected, have our ideas taken seriously, our words carry weight, and ultimately make a positive difference. So I'm going to stop there and open up to questions. Maria.
Coming back. Let me remind everyone to post their questions on the Q&A box. We will be watching all these questions and asking Rebecca in about 10-15 minutes to reply to those questions. So please feel free to just push the Q&A box. Rebecca, it's all very interesting, and I'm sure that a lot of people will read the book and will get the benefits of Gravitas. But I would like you to share with us a couple of stories, a couple of examples of real life executives that you have coached and you have taken them to the journey of Gravitas, and let us know how they managed to increase their Gravitas, and maybe choose different personalities and share these stories with us, because we all care a lot about the real life examples.
Sure. Okay. Absolutely. Great question. Well, the one person that really comes to mind is somebody who is a senior partner in a professional services firm, and she is very high on detail. She is extremely high on critical thinking. And she was increasingly having the opportunity to present. So to be in big meetings, to be hosting, to be asking to give keynotes. You know, Gravitas isn't just about those big presentations, but it's also about important meetings. So you know, the times that we really want Gravitas is where situation matters. And actually those can be the ones where we're most nervous. So for her, other people would have said that she was, I mean, extremely intelligent, very high on critical thinking, very detailed, not necessarily somebody who was great at connecting and winning people over. And her nervousness when it came to, she felt okay in situations in smaller meetings because she's such an expert in her field. But the moment that she was invited into bigger meetings, so for example, you know, she was asked to join a board, but that wasn't about her specific area of expertise. And so she felt like, how could I possibly have gravitas in this meeting? Or big presentations, when she was giving keynotes, she felt really nervous. And so I guess there's a few things that can be helpful there. The first one is to focus more on the impact that she wanted to have on the people she was with, rather than on how she was coming across. You know, we spend so much time worrying about ourselves. Actually, what we need to do is give more attention to the audience, to be thinking about these people, what matters to them, and what kind of impact we want to have on them. Another thing that we did when it came to keynotes, one thing I encourage my clients to do, so I do lots of presentation preparation with some of my clients, and with keynotes, we spent more time focusing on her beginning, so how she started and how she ended. Because, you know, how you start shapes how people think and how they feel about you. And how you finish kind of leaves that, you know, it's that lasting impression. But what we spend most time doing is prepping the content in the middle, like prepping the detail of what we're going to talk about. But actually that's the stuff that she knows, right? So she is an expert. So when she's being given a keynote, she could talk in the middle. She could just chat around that. But instead she was spending all her time scripting that out, but not thinking about that kind of first impression. So I make my clients, when we're doing this work, the only thing I make them script out is their opening 3 lines. What are the first few things you're going to say? How are you going to say it? And we spend a couple of hours getting the scripting around those things and making sure the key messages were coming through. So that practice really helps. You know, I have some clients who say, oh, I don't want to be overly prepared. I don't want to spend too much time preparing so that I don't come across as faking it or too rigid. But actually preparation does help you. So there's really interesting research that helps us here. And it helps me with thinking about this client and how she developed her gravitas. The researchers show that when we're trying to influence people, that actually there are 3 things that are really important. The first is what they call target assessment, which sounds pretty cold, but actually it's about giving greater consideration to your audience and to the people. So if it's an important meeting, if there's 10 people, who are the other 9 people that you're going to be with? And what's their personality? What's their role? What's most important to them right now? What matters to them? What's difficult for them? What are the biggest barriers for them right now? So target assessment, that first thing, is about giving greater consideration to the people you're trying to influence. The second is what they call executive preparation, which is simply the amount of time that you spend preparing for that influencing scenario. And then the third one is influencing techniques. And I go into a lot of detail. There's a whole chapter in the book on influencing techniques, but essentially there is a wide range of influencing techniques that we can use, but we tend to over-rely on a few. Now, most of us over-rely on rational persuasion. Don't get me wrong, we should use logic and we should use rational persuasion, but there's a lot of other ones that are beneficial as well. And we tend to just use what's been modeled to us or what comes naturally to us. And so being more intentional with which influencing technique we use can help us as well. But the researcher said that of those three, of particular importance is that target assessment, that, you know, giving consideration to your audience and the people that you're working with. It's not just in keynotes, it's in meetings as well. Because when you do that, you are more likely to spend better time preparing, and you are more likely to use the right influencing techniques for those scenarios. So that was one client. So she was really detailed like that, and that nervousness, it just helped her to have some strategies. It's not enough to say just stop being nervous. Obviously we did some breathing work and things like that that can help, because, you know, one thing is it actually really is important to calm your body down, because if you're nervous, kind of holding everything here, I mean, everyone knows what that feeling's like. When I'm really nervous, I get kind of tingling down my arms. And when we talk about taking deep breaths, and I mean, now we know how to breathe well, right? I think that's fairly mainstream, breathing in and out for longer. What it does is it calms our body down. So our brain can be yelling, I'm nervous, this isn't going to go well. But our body is saying, it's okay, you got this. And great research shows that the impact of that actually people can pick up on it. And when they perceive nervousness, they sense it from your body language, then they start to think that this person's questioning themselves. Should I be questioning them? And some research even suggests that they start to think more about the person than about the content that they're saying. So it is really important to do that work to calm yourself down if you're going into an important meeting or a big presentation. So that's one person that really helped her.
So preparedness is very important. I mean, you need to prepare, you need to target the audience and think about what's important to them rather than what's important for you. Staying on this, I wanted to share your views on the following. I think in the book you talk a little bit about darker gravitas, in the sense that, you know, we all came across people who are, they might have gravitas, but they have a negative type of gravitas. They are either a bully or they are disrespectful. And sometimes these people they come from a position of power, or they are dominant in the organization. And I was wondering, do these people, can they change? Have you been coaching such people? Have you seen a difference in their behavior? And tell us how to get from the darker type of gravitas to the positive gravitas.
Yeah, absolutely, Maria. It's such an important question. You know, when you asked me to think of different people that I've coached over the years, another person came to mind who, let's call him Ben. Ben was a senior leader, and I got the call and the sponsor of the coaching said to me, she phrased it as something like, Rebecca, you'll never be able to crack this. Like, it won't, I don't think this person can change, but we have this situation. He's making everyone cry. And it's exactly as you described. So just fairly fierce, you know, creating a culture of eggshells around him. Not having any grace for people's mistakes, being quite aggressive in his tone. And so, I mean, I'll never forget, this was probably, I'd say more than 10 years ago when I first started working with him, and I still know him now. So it's wonderful to see the transformation, and actually just as a testimony to the difference that he's made in his journey, and how people can shift from being someone who has this kind of adverse effect on others to someone who's really well regarded. I still work with that firm, and people there say to me that he's one of their favorite people to mentor them because he's so great to work with. And I'm like, if only you knew. So in our first meeting, I said to him, people feel anxious to be around you, and sometimes people cry. And he kind of blew it. He was like, really? No. And I said, well, it's just, so I've been having conversations, you know, I had agreed with him beforehand that I would get some feedback. And I said, people feel nervous to work with you because they don't know if they're going to get into trouble suddenly. They feel that they could easily and quickly be in trouble, you know, that you're quite aggressive. And honestly, people actually cry as a result of working with you. And then I said to him, Is that the impact that you want to have on the people you work with? Now, if he had said to me, I don't care, then I don't know, A, that I would have continued working with him, but also B, whether he would really have changed. So I think he could probably have faked it enough for it not to be an issue anymore. But he didn't say no. He said, he didn't say that he didn't care. He said, that's not how I want people to feel about working with me. That's not the impact that I want to have on them. And that moment changes everything. So once you make a decision about the impact that you want to have on people, you can start that journey of shifting from, none of us, anyone who's been in leadership knows that there's no perfect leader. Like sometimes things are really stressful. Sometimes things are very difficult. And sometimes you say things or have an impact that you just didn't mean to have. So none of us are perfect. None of us always align our intention and our impact. But the key to it is to be intentional. What kind of leader do I want to be today? That's the question that we ask ourselves every day. How am I going to show up today? Regardless of the busyness, regardless of the emails that come that I wasn't expecting, the bad news that might come, the stress, the massive opportunity that might take away my time, whatever it is, how am I going to show up today? What matters to me? What was on that list of how I'd want people to describe me? What kind of leader do I want to be? And so that was the starting point. And then the second thing is to get feedback. If we don't get feedback, for starters, we need more feedback. It's data, but we don't want it. And the higher you get in organizational life, often, it's not always true because some organizations have a really strong culture feedback, but often the more senior we get, the less feedback we get. When you start out working, I often think you can't walk down the corridor without someone telling you you're doing something wrong and you've got to do it differently, but the more senior you get, the less you get feedback unless you're asking for it. So, when I had this feedback that I perhaps was coming across as stubborn, my coach suggested to me I go back and ask some people. And so I did. I asked someone who'd been working with me for years, Sarah, and I was back in London. I'd been in the States, I was back in London. And I said to her, completely out of the blue, hey, Sarah, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate me on stubbornness? 10. I was like, what? I can't believe it. I was so shocked. I was upset. But then I had to unpack it and find out why and what I was doing and shift, my behaviors so that I was having the impact I intended. And I was being collaborative and not shutting people down. So, and we all have that. So I'm comfortable to share it because nobody is perfect, right? We all have things to work on. So with him, it was about being more intentional with the impact he wanted to have and getting feedback. And so I just encourage you that when, sometimes in organizations, we have a lot of structures for feedback. And if we don't have those structures, then we can over rely on the formalities of feedback. So if we have the structures in place for formal feedback, then we don't seek informal feedback. And if we don't have the structures in place, then we think, well, it's not our organization's just not like that. As a leader, just individually choose to be someone who seeks feedback. So, I think language like, what could I do differently to make our working relationship more effective? It's a non-threatening way of saying, give me some feedback. Or you could say, what could I do differently to have a more positive impact with the team or when I'm working with this client? And people might say, oh, nothing, really, you're wonderful. And then you say, oh, that's really encouraging, thank you. And what could I do to be better?
And insist on the feedback.
Yeah, just one of my colleagues and friends in the States, and he literally pulls over the car and says, no, I can't take this long trip with you if you're not going to give me useful feedback. You need to travel alone. But I think that just encouraging to say, no, I really want to understand. I'm committed to my own development and I value your input. What could I do differently in order for this relationship to be more effective, or for me to be more effective in how I'm showing up in meetings or presentations or just working with you or the team? And then when people give you the feedback, the most important thing is not being defensive. It's easy to say, oh, but that's just because da-da-da. right? So we instantly, without meaning to, we kind of defend why we behave that way or why we do something. Really the key to getting good feedback is saying, that's interesting and useful, thank you, is there anything else? Or that's interesting, can you help me to understand that a bit more? So can we explain that to me a bit more in terms of behaviors? What have I been doing, or what could I do that you see? Now, remember, it's just a perspective. It's somebody's perspective. It's not a fact. So I encourage you to get feedback from different people. But if we're talking about how to shift from being someone who in some way at some point has potentially an adverse impact on others, might be somebody who others aren't comfortable to be around. If you want to be someone who creates more psychological safety and really opens up things, that it's a more inclusive environment, then be intentional with yourself as a leader and seek feedback well and often.
So you don't rely on those 360 feedback forms once a year. I mean, you do need to solicit it more often.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes those annual processes can be useful. I have pretty strong points of view of what kind of 360 you should be looking for as part of big organizational design and development. But, I think some are helpful and some are actually unhelpful. It's the way it's done as well. But I think those are useful, but it's not enough. So get that informal feedback regularly as well.
Okay, one question that I was wondering on, Rebecca, is people who make an effort and learn this Gravitas skill, because it's a skill. You told us it's a myth to think of Gravitas as being confidence and or you have a charisma or you have a gift. You can develop it, and you have seen it. You have seen it with your clients. Do you think it's something that you develop and you hold on to it? I mean, you learn it and you behave in a different way? Or is it something that you learn and practice momentarily, and then you fall back to your old self and to your old habits?
Yeah, I think that, it's not, if it's meaningful development, like we talk a lot in Coach Advisor, we talk a lot about driving meaningful behavioral change, that it's not about just being able to show up in the moment the way that you need to, but actually, positive development that is embedded and starts to shape how we show up and how we interact with people. And the great thing about that is it means it becomes less tiring because initially, so when my clients say, I don't want to pretend to be someone else though, I absolutely agree with that they shouldn't have to pretend to be someone else. And so what matters to you, what impact you want to have on people, what do you value, what are your natural strengths, this stuff, I'm a strengths-based psychologist and really believe in the power of the strengths approach and positive psychology and understanding your own energizers, because they're stable, they rarely change over time, so we need to understand them. So I think that the process of development is something that becomes more natural to you, that aligning your intention and your impact becomes more natural. But at the beginning, it can feel quite uncomfortable. Like when I think back to the woman I was talking to you about, who was very nervous and also very critical thinking in meetings. So for example, let's take the critical thinking point, right? So critical thinking is a strength of hers. It gives her energy. It's part of why she's so good at her job. And her strength in overdrive is that in important meetings, somebody suggests an idea and she says, well, that won't work because X, right? She sees the problem straight away. So it's a strength in overdrive. Now, when I ask her what matters to you in terms of the impact you want to have on people, yes, she wants to bring that critical thinking, but also she wants to create an environment that's psychologically safe, where people feel that they can share ideas, that they can come up with other solutions, that they can offer a different perspective without the fear of being shut down instantly, right? So that's what matters to her. So the development process is choosing, I'm going to have the idea for why it won't work straight away, but instead of jumping straight to telling someone what's wrong with their idea, I'm going to say something like, okay, tell me a bit more about this. Help me to understand it more. Or, you know, that's interesting. Let's explore it. And let's have a look at some of these other ideas and what else might work instead, right? So it's about the way. Now that doesn't feel natural to her, right? She had to learn that kind of language. She had to learn to put the pause button on her critical thinking, and to do what we call creating strengths mastery, like to use your strengths well, rather than just all out, here I am, take me or leave me.
Yeah, good point.
And then that becomes more natural over time. So it's not, you don't show up and then you forget it and then you have to do it again. It becomes a part of your leadership and professional behavior.
Okay. One last question from me, and then we'll give the floor to Stefanos, because we've got a lot of questions. How do you maintain gravitas in this, COVID world, in the virtual world? We have not been seeing each other for a year. We have not been in physical meetings. Sometimes the relationship with clients is a little bit difficult. What is your advice to our audience here? Because we've got quite a few people watching us, and I'm sure they have this question at the back of their minds.
Yeah, so I guess there's 2 points to that. When it comes to virtual gravitas, to having the impact and to being trusted and respected and having your ideas taken seriously in a virtual world, it can be more difficult. I think that one thing I'd say is that we can, in a virtual context, we can quickly jump from we're here and we go, maybe there's very small talk. How is it? The weather's nice, which I'm obviously not saying in London, but, whatever the small talk is, a few minutes of that. And then we jump straight to the agenda and straight into the detail. And we need to do this in person, but we definitely need to be more intentional with it virtually, is to create what I call space in the middle, right? Between the small talk and the agenda, it's the space for the bigger picture conversation. So like, not just how are things with you, but how are things with your business or your team? What's most important to you right now? What really matters to you? What's most challenging to you right now? So if I asked you just one or two of those questions, Maria, if I just said, what's most important to you right now? And what's most challenging to you right now? And maybe I'd even need to call out, because we're so used to this virtual rhythm of small talk, agenda, like straight to the point. I'd need to say, hey, before we get into this, let's just take a few moments to chat. I'd love to know how things are going for you. Like, what's most important to you right now? What are you finding most difficult? And that can be personally or at work. When we understand people's bigger picture and what really matters to them, it's not, if we want to have an authentic impact, it's not just understanding what matters to us, it's understanding what matters to other people. That's how we create meaningful impact. But we need to carve out those windows for that time, because I just think we're operating very quickly in a virtual world. We hang up on one meeting, we go straight into the next one, and we are slipping very quickly into not having those bigger picture conversations that in business are so important and can actually change the whole flow of the conversation, the meeting, the presentation, whatever it is. So that's what I'd say when it comes to the virtual world and how much we're doing virtually now. But, you mentioned about the pandemic and how the impact that that's had on us. And I have to say, this has been an extremely difficult period for pretty much everyone in different ways, right? So we haven't all been, no two people have experienced this the same way. And yet what we have experienced is difficulty together and uncertainty together. And neuroscientists would say that uncertainty triggers in our brains as an error message. So when we have uncertainty, our brains are basically going, error, error, error. That we need to close that loop, right? Our brains are looking for rest in the certainty, and that we're wired like that. So we crave certainty. So that's been very difficult. Ultimately, it's exhausting. that's how it plays out, is that we have lower energy. And so when I loop it back to what we're seeing, so our whole team of coaches consistently report that in their coaching conversations and in working with their clients, time and time again, people are able to perform. So they're typically mid to senior leaders that we're coaching, and they're able to perform, and other people wouldn't necessarily know that they're struggling. But in what I call the quiet of the coaching room, which is when it's just the two of you and people know that it's confidential, that they can open up and they can trust that that's a safe space to be real and pretty raw, that they say, I'm just not okay. Like sometimes I'm okay, but I'm so tired of getting to Sunday night and thinking, oh, here we go again. Some clients say, I just want to feel positive on a Monday morning again. I just want to be myself. I used to be fairly resilient. I used to be fairly happy and everything is okay. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but I was pretty much happy. And I hear it time and time again. So we're working with a lot of people right now in their psychological well-being, in their resilience, in how to find joy again in their day and in their work, how to have energy ultimately, because it has taken its toll. And so they're still performing and doing their work, but knowing that actually something needs to change. So it can be pretty difficult.
You're describing the mood of everyone, I think, Rebecca. This is how everybody feels.
It is, yeah.
But I've taken up a lot of time, and Stefanos should please come in. Hi, Stefanos.
Hi, Mara. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi.
So there's a lot of interesting questions coming up. There's a few themes. One theme is how do you handle cultural differences? I mean, especially in this time where we're all on screen and we're having meetings at the same time. One person is in Cyprus, another one is in the US, another one is in Singapore. So how do you manage to, considering all the cultural differences and time differences, and all those implications, how do you maintain your gravitas across these differences culturally and all that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and so important for these days when in our virtual world, actually, it's become so much easier to work in different parts of the world. In the past, maybe I would have come over to you in Cyprus and be there, and some people would be joining in, but I'm sure that, I can see that there are participants from all over the world coming in. And then meetings, it's so much easier to, suddenly from having a largely UK-based group of clients that we're working with, now, I go from coaching clients in Australia to, teaching at Harvard Law School in the evenings, or, working with people in South America, like just all over. And that's true for all of us. And that's a great thing, is to be able to work with so many people from around the world. But it means that, as always, we need to be attuned to cultural differences. And there are things that in different cultures are regarded as okay and not okay. And I think that we have to be curious. I'd say that people with gravitas, to have authentic gravitas, we have to choose curiosity. I can see in the chat somebody talking about being knowledgeable, and absolutely, like, knowing your stuff and what you're talking about is kind of a prerequisite. And at the same time, I think what's important is that we know we're committed to learning and developing more. But it's easy to kind of rest in your expertise. And particularly once you get to a certain stage of your career, we can stop being curious, because we kind of know our stuff. And so I say, just create those meaningful windows to ask people what, even saying, when you're starting to work with somebody new in a culture where you haven't worked before, you could ask somebody. So, I speak a little bit of Japanese from school days, but I don't know much about Japan. I've been there once, but I have a colleague who, she lived in Japan for over 20 years. And so if I'm going to start working with a client in Japan, then my first point of call is probably to go to her and to say, hey, Vicky, I've got this opportunity. Do you have any advice for me? Right. So loop it back, think about that target audience, right? That target assessment of understanding the people that you're going to be trying to influence and to have a positive impact on. So taking the time out for that, asking them. So things like, what's most important to you in how we work together? So carving out, again, that's that space in the middle conversation. It's not just a nice chat. What matters to you? What does a great working relationship look like to you? Okay, choosing to be curious. And I think that when we ask from a position of genuinely wanting to understand, people do tell you and are really open to those conversations. So when it comes to working across cultures, that's one thing. And then the other is seeking feedback in real time. So, you know, fairly early on in working with people in a different culture that you're not used to working in, I would quickly be asking, how is it going so far? Is there anything that we should be doing differently? I mean, when I've asked these questions in the past, some of the answers have really surprised me. And that's great, because you're creating space, a comfortable environment and meaningful time for people to genuinely tell you what it is that you need to do differently.
Great. And another, so curiosity and asking for feedback would help in that. And another popular question is, how do you manage if you have a lot of surface gravitas in the environment around you? How do you manage to, I don't know, survive or get your authentic gravitas across the line, let's say?
Yeah, I think it can be exhausting as well. If you feel like there's a lot of posturing, a lot of dominance. And one of the things that happens is, I think it kind of hits almost a tipping point of then it becomes part of the culture. And so if you're in a position where you are able to shift organizational culture, then I really encourage you to look at that big picture level. So when we do work in organizational culture, it's actually really similar to leadership development, which is asking, what do you want the culture to be like? And we're working with a lot of organizations now where they are really committed to shifting the culture to be more inclusive, you know, when it comes to diversity in all different aspects. And so if you have the opportunity, if you're seeing it around you a lot, I would first ask the question, is this about the culture of our company or our firm or our organization? And how can we shift that? And if you don't feel that you have the ability to influence culture on a bigger scale, you know, it depends on your kind of role and influence. I mean, for starters, I would say you can start to influence the culture and change things. But I'd say don't be discouraged by it. For starters, it's quite exhausting. Stop looking at everyone else and thinking they're just like that, I'm not like that. And then make sure that you find your voice. So I think it can have a negative impact on our confidence when we see a lot of people around us like that. And we need to choose that courage to think, I am going to speak up and say what I think here. It can also be really helpful to map out your strengths, like to know what your strengths are and to make sure that you're utilizing those, because that kind of rebuilds and gives you energy. But just watch out for that negative self-talk. You know, negative self-talk can just, some of my clients call it a gremlin on my shoulder. You know, like the gremlin keeps saying to me, it's the same thing, you know, anytime I want to do that. So there's a whole chapter in the book on, I call it Gravitas in the Dark, which is about things like gremlins and when you don't have the strength and the energy. And I think that's probably the situation when you're surrounded by surface gravitas and that dominance.
No matter, we have to have a follow-up, you know, live session because there's so many questions that we didn't get to. So I don't know how we're going to deal with that.
Shall we take one more, and then we.
Another theme is around, you mentioned the relationship between gravitas and integrity and gravitas and courage. How about gravitas and the relationship with ethics?
Yeah, so I'm really glad that I saw that question in the chat, and I thought that was such an important question. You know, ultimately, ethics being ethical is the foundation of trust. So we are not going to be able to develop authentic gravitas and meaningful connection and relationships in an environment of being, you know, where there's any kind of unethical behavior. I think considering what ethics means in your context, right? So it's not just in terms of your culture, in terms of your profession or your industry. You know, a lot of us have kind of code of conducts that we work to in our professional standards. And then, you know, the question looped in courage there. And I'd say that in order to, if we're committed to creating an ethical environment and making sure that the work around us is ethical, that we are going to need courage to speak up when we are seeing things that we don't agree with. And I just encourage you to do that wisely, to really think about, you know, who can you talk to? What's the right way of going about this? Because I think that question probably comes from when I see stuff around me that I think is unethical, what do I do? And I would encourage you to, first of all, you know, that flag, notice the flag when it goes off and choose to act on it, and to do that wisely and to think about how you are going to, sometimes it's about having the courage to speak up. Yeah, it's a really important question.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Excellent. There are more questions, but maybe all these answers could be found in Rebecca's book. And we're going to be sharing 10 books with our audience. Right after the end of the session, we're going to have an electronic draw. So it will be 10 names that will have a book at their address. We're going to reach out to them and get their address. And of course, we will let you know Monday who is the winner. And you can also see this information on our social media. If you reach out the Life-Changing Ideas, you will know if you're the winner. I would like to thank everybody for joining in and for staying with us. Rebecca, it has been a wonderful talk, an eye-opener, and I'm sure a lot of people will be interested to get more information through the book. Thank you so much for joining Life-Changing Ideas.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye to everyone.